Hello everyone, this is part 2 of how to make Plants vs Zombies in Scratch. In this video, I'll be creating a plant selection area where you can buy pea shooters and place it anywhere on the screen. I'll also be making it so that you can place multiple pea shooters at once, and I'm going to create a simple zombie spawner. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, check it out, link is in the description below. But anyways, let's get started. So currently, this is our game where we have a pea shooter and a zombie. And the pea shooter is shooting the zombie just like that. But right now, the pea shooter is stuck at this position, and we want to be able to buy and place pea shooters. So to do so, let's first create a plant selection area. So I'm going to create a new sprite, and I'm going to select this rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a rectangle. So something like this. Alright, now I'm going to center it. And for the fill, I'll make it brown. And I'll shrink it a bit. And this looks pretty good. So I'm going to call this plant selection. Okay, now I'm going to drag this to the top left of the screen, somewhere around here. And I'm going to go to events, drag a when flag clicked. Then I'm going to go to motion, drag a go to XY. And this should be the same X and Y position. Alright, so this is the area where we are going to buy our pea shooter. So now let's create a pea shooter icon. So I'm going to create a new sprite, and I'll call this pea shooter icon. And then I'm going to go to the pea shooter sprite and drag the costume inside of our pea shooter icon sprite. So now the costume should have copied over. I'm going to delete the first costume. And I am going to remove that invisible line, which we added in the last video. And now the pea shooter should be centered in our costume just like that. Alright, now I'm going to draw a rectangle over this pea shooter, just like that. And I'm going to center it and send it to the back. Okay, and I'm going to draw a line over here. And the space over here is where we're going to add our cost in later videos. But for now, this is going to be our pea shooter icon. Okay, so now let's go inside of the code. And I'm going to first drag a when flag clicked. And I'm going to make this icon much smaller. So I'm going to drag a set size to block. And let's try 25%. Okay, maybe 30%. And I'm going to drag the icon over here. So now I'm going to go to motion and drag a go to XY block, and these X and Y positions should match. So now we want this to interact with the mouse. So I'm going to first go to control and drag a forever loop and grab an if else and check if touching mouse pointer, then we want to do stuff. And let's make the icon a tiny bit larger once it touches the mouse pointer. So I'm going to go to looks, grab a set size to, and let's do something like set size to 33%. And else, if it's not touching the mouse pointer, let's just set its size back to its original size. So for me, it's 30%. Alright, now let's try it out. And it gets a tiny bit larger if it's touching the mouse pointer. I'll do maybe 32%. And now it looks something like that. Cool. So now we want to be able to have a pea shooter once we click on this icon. So inside of this if else, let's drag an if and check if mouse down. Then we want to first wait until not mouse down, just to make sure we get exactly one mouse click. So wait until not mouse down. And then we want to go to control and create a clone of our pea shooter, which is this sprite. And we also want the game to know that we're currently placing a plant. So I'm going to go to variables and create a new variable. I'll call this placing plant. And then click OK. And I'm going to set placing plant to yes. And then I'm going to go back up and set placing plant to no when the flag is clicked. Now let's go inside of the pea shooter. And since we created a clone of this pea shooter, we want to go to control and drag a when I start as a clone. And under this, let's drag a forever loop And let's make the pea shooter follow the mouse. So let's drag an if else. And let's check if placing plant is equal to yes. Then we want to go to mouse pointer. Just like that. So if we just try it out, then if we click on the icon, then we have a clone of the pea shooter following our mouse. But now we don't want our original pea shooter, or this one, to just stay on the screen and shoot. So let's drag all of this inside of the else. So once we're not placing the plant, then we want the pea shooter to shoot. Okay, but we also want one more variable, and we want to detect whether or not we have actually placed the plant. So let's go to variables and then create a new variable, and I'll call this isPlaced. And then I'll select for this sprite only and click OK. So we want to make it so that once we buy a plant and then click again anywhere on this map, then we want to place the plant. So in that case, inside of if placing plant, let's also drag an if and then go to sensing and drag a mouse down. And then inside of here, we want to check if the mouse is down, then we want to set isPlaced to yes and set placing plant to no. And that means that we have actually placed the plant and we are no longer in the action of currently placing the plant. So now let's go to operators, grab an and then I'm going to right click, duplicate this, and check if isPlaced is equal to no. And if we're currently placing the plant, then we want to do all of this. Else that means that the plant is bought and it is placed. So that means we want the plant to start shooting. So all of this might seem pretty confusing, but once we just try it out, then it might make more sense. So now under this when I start as a clone, let's just set isPlaced to no, and I'm going to drag a show and also hide the original sprite. Okay, now let's try it out. So right now we have no plants, and once we click on this, then we have a pea shooter which follows us, and then once we click again, then it's placed on the ground and it starts shooting. Awesome. Now if we try again, we can place multiple pea shooters. Cool. So now we have the placing working, but as you can see, there's a lot of issues. First off, all of the peas are coming from the same place. And second off, we want to be able to place the pea shooters on a grid, and not just anywhere on the map. So let's first fix the issue of the peas not coming out of the pea shooter. So the best way to fix this issue is to actually make the pea shooters and the pea inside of the same sprite. So I'm going to go inside of the pea sprite, and then I'm going to drag this entire block inside of the pea shooter sprite. Alright, now let's go inside of the pea shooter sprite, and we have this block. And we also want to drag the pea costume, so go to P and then go to its costumes and drag it inside of the pea shooter sprite. Okay, now the pea shooter sprite should have both the pea shooter and the pea. So now inside of the pea shooter sprite, I'm going to create a new variable. And I'm going to call this clone type. And then select for this sprite only, and then click OK. And whenever the pea shooter is shooting, instead of creating clone of a pea, we want to actually create clone of myself, and right before that, set clone type to, let's say, something called bullet, so that we know we're creating a clone of the pea. Okay, so now back to the block which we added in. We want to surround this with an if. So let's first check if clone type is equal to bullet. Then that means that this is going to be the pea clone, or the bullet clone. So I'm going to drag this around this entire block. And inside of here, I am going to drag a switch costume to the pea costume. Okay, now instead of go to XY, we now want to just drag a change X by and also a change Y by. And we want to change X by 7 and also change Y by 13. So it's just these two numbers inside of the pluses. Alright, now we can remove this block and drag this back inside. So now what we did was that we combined this pea shooter sprite and also this pea sprite into a single sprite. So now we can actually delete this pea sprite. And now we just have this single sprite which contains our pea shooter and also our pea. And the reason I did that is because this allows it so that we can have multiple pea shooter clones shooting multiple pea clones. And this is something that we have to do in Scratch in order to make clones spawning other clones to work properly. So now that we have a bullet clone type, we must also have a plant clone type. So under the when flag clicked, I'm just going to go to variables and set clone type to plant. And I'm also going to switch costume to pea shooter. Okay, so now whenever we click on our pea shooter icon, we should spawn a pea shooter, and once we click anywhere on the map, then it should start shooting peas from where it is, just like that. Awesome. Now, as you can see, our peas are correctly coming out of the right pea shooters. So now one thing is that the peas aren't actually hitting the zombie. So let's fix that. So inside of the zombie sprite, we no longer have our pea sprite. So this if touching pea is not working. So instead we want if touching pea shooter. Now there's a problem if we just leave it like that. And that's if the zombie is touching this pea shooter, just like that, then it still takes damage. But we only want the zombie to take damage from the peas. So how do we fix this? Well, inside of the pea shooter sprite, whenever the bullet is shot, then instead of this wait 0 seconds, let's go to events and broadcast a message. And I'll call this hit zombie. All right. And actually, instead of this, we want broadcast hit zombie and wait. So broadcast hit zombie and wait, and then delete this clone. Now inside of the zombie sprite, instead of a when flag clicked, we want a when I receive hit zombie, then check all of this. And I'm also going to make the flash in a separate message. So I'm going to drag a broadcast over here, and then broadcast new message. I'll call this flash animation, click OK, and then drag a when I receive flash animation, then do the flash. Okay, cool. So now the zombie should correctly detect the pea. Now let's try it out. As you can see, it's not getting hit by the pea shooter, but once we place it, then it gets hit by the pea, just like that. Awesome. And now if we also place multiple pea shooters, then it should get destroyed more quickly. Just like that. Cool. And now the next thing I want to add is that I want the pea shooters placements to follow this grid pattern, and not just anywhere on the screen. So let's create a new sprite, and I'll call this grid position. And I'm just going to draw a really small circle. So what you draw here doesn't really matter, but this is just going to show that this is a grid position where you can place the plant. So now let's go inside of the code. And now we want these circles to fill up the entire grid just like this. So each circle in one of these squares on the lawn. So now let's make these circles fill up this entire screen. So let's drag a when flag clicked, and let's hide the original sprite. And I'm going to go to my blocks and create a new block. And I'll call this initialize. And then make sure to select run without screen refresh and click OK. So this block is going to set up our grid. So now inside of this grid, let's create a few new variables. First off, I'll create one called Y position, or Y pose for short, and then select for this sprite only and click OK. And now let's set Y pose to the starting Y position of the grid position. So I'll just say somewhere over here. This is going to be the first position which we can place our plant at. So this is around Y113. All right. And now I'm going to create another new variable. I'll call this clone number and select for this sprite only and click OK. So now I'm going to set clone number to 1. And after this, we want to create all of our grid positions. So I'm going to go to Control and drag a repeat block. And since we have 5 rows of squares, we want to repeat 5 times. And now we want to create multiple clones of this circle and also move it to the right, every single row. So for this, I'm going to create a new block, and I'll call this create point. And then I'm going to add 2 number inputs. So this one, and then for the first one, I'll call it X, and the second one, I'll call it Y, and then click OK. So now inside of here, I'm going to go to motion and then drag a go to XY block and drag X into here and Y into here. All right, now after that, I'm going to go to variables, change clone number by 1, and also go to control and create a clone of myself. So now inside of this repeat, let's drag our create point block, put it inside of there, and now the first bubble here is going to be our X position. So right now we have our grid point at X negative 185. So I'm going to put negative 185 inside of here, and then our Y position is going to be in this second bubble. So I'm going to drag Y pose inside of here. And now I'm going to right click, duplicate this create point block. And now our next point, we want it to spawn around over here. So in the center of this square. So this is X negative 141. And then we want to keep on going for every single square. So now this one is around right here, negative 92. And then the next one is around over here. So negative 41. And now we have all of our X positions. And after that, let's just change Y position by a certain amount. So we know we want these points to go down a square. So that would be around negative 60, which I calculated beforehand. So now, if we just go to My Blocks and drag the initialize block under the when flag clicked, then if we also drag a when I start as a clone and show the clone, then we should have a screen full of these dots. Awesome. And these dots are going to represent where you can place the plants. So now one question you might have is that, why did I create all of these create point blocks? Why did I not just do change X position by a certain amount? Well, I could do that, but the dots aren't going to be evenly spread on this grid because this grid is a bit uneven. So that's why I'm creating all of these separate create point blocks. Okay, so now whenever we place the pea shooter, we want it to go to the nearest circle. So in that case, it would be this one. So how do we do that? Well, inside of the grid position sprite, under the when I start as a clone, let's drag a forever loop. And inside of each clone, we are going to check its distance from the mouse pointer. And the one with the shortest distance is going to be the one which the pea shooter goes to. So inside of this forever loop, let's grab an if and check if placing plant is equal to yes. So that means we are currently placing this pea shooter. Then we want to create a few new variables. So first off, I'll call this place X and then click OK. And also place Y and click OK. And this is going to be the position where we are going to place our pea shooter. And this place X and place Y is going to be one of these create point positions. So to find the dot that is the closest to this pea shooter, inside of this if, we are going to do another if. And this is going to be a very long equation, but this is just the distance formula. So let's go to operators, grab a lesser than, and let's grab an absolute of block, change it to square root, which is sqrt, and let's do square root of, grab a multiplication, and grab a minus, put it on the left, and then let's check the mouse X minus the current X position of the position clone, and then right click duplicate, drag this on the right of the multiplication, and then I am going to right click duplicate this entire square root and change this to mouse Y, and change the X positions into Y positions. Now after that, let's go to operators, grab a plus, drag this on the left, drag this on the right, and this is our first half of the equation. So let's drag this on the left side, and this is checking the distance of one of these clones with our pea shooter. And then we want to compare this distance with our current shortest distance with our place X and place Y variables. So we can just right click this plus, so duplicate, and instead of X position and Y position, we just do mouse X minus place X, and also mouse Y minus place Y. And now we can drag this entire thing on the right hand side of this lesser than, so right over here. So again, this might seem super duper confusing, and this is because this is a really long equation, but I'm going to try my best to shorten this. So to make this a bit shorter and more readable, let's create a few new variables. So the first one is just going to be this. So I'll just call this mx for short because it's like mouse x minus x position. So mx, I'll select for this by only and click OK. Now I'm going to set mx to this. So now we can take this out and now just do mx times mx. And for this one, this is mouse y minus y position. So I'll just call this my and then select for this by only and click OK. And let's set my to this. Now we can take this one out because it's the same thing and do my times my. And now for this one, this is mouse x minus place x. So I'll just call this px. Select for this by only, click OK. And also we have mouse y minus place y. So I'll call this one py. Select for this by only and click OK. Cool. Now let's set px and py. So first, px is this, mouse x minus place x, and then py is mouse y minus place y. Just like that. So now we have our 4 variables, and now let's replace this with px, so px times px, and then lastly this one, replace it with py times py. So now our equation is a bit shorter. It's just this, square root of mx times mx plus square root of my times my, if that added together is lesser than square root of px times px plus square root of py times py. And it's okay if you haven't learned this yet, but this is just the distance formula. So we are comparing 2 distances. And this is going to get our shortest distance of the red circle with our pea shooter. So now if we have a shorter distance, so if this if statement is true, then inside of here, we want to set place x to the x position of the circle clone, and also set place y to the y position of the circle clone. Okay, so that was probably the hardest part of this video, but now we can go inside of the pea shooter. And once we place down the pea shooter, so inside of this mouse down, we can just go to our place X and place Y. So now let's try it out. So we have our place X and place Y. And as you can see, we have the place X and place Y updating based off of which red circle the pea shooter is closest to. Just like that. And now once we place down the pea shooter, let's say over here, then it's going to snap to that red circle. Just like that. Cool. As you can see, the pea shooters snap to the closest red circle. So now we have the pea shooters on a single grid. Awesome. So now let's make all of these red circles invisible. So inside of the grid position sprite, we can just drag a set ghost effect to 100 under the when I start as a clone. And now everything still should work just like so. Now let's fix this P problem where the P is sticking to the P shooter. So inside of the P shooter sprite, under the when I start as a clone, let's just add a if clone type is equal to plant. And now let's try it again. So now the P's are no longer stuck to the P shooter, just like that, and everything should work just fine. Awesome. Now the next thing I want to add is that I want a shadow of the P shooter to display when we are hovering over a grid. So to do so, let's go inside of the P shooter sprite, and under the when flag clicked, I'm going to create a new clone type. So I'm going to set clone type to, let's call this pre-plant. So this is before we plant the P shooter, but we are hovering over these squares. So under this one, let's go to control and drag a create clone of myself. And after that, we want to set clone type to plant, just like that. And also one thing is that I do want to set placing plant to no. I did forget that, but let's just do that when the flag is clicked. Okay, so now let's create the code for our plant preview or our plant shadow. So let's go to control and drag a when I start as a clone. And let's drag a forever loop and check if our clone type is equal to pre-plant. And if it is, then we also want to check if placing plant is equal to yes. That means we are currently hovering our plant over the grid. And then after that, we want our clone to look sort of like a shadow. So I'm going to set ghost effect to, let's say 60, and then go to motion and drag a go to XY. And we want the preview to go to place X and place Y. And let's also go to looks and then show. And now if you just try this out, then we have a shadow of the plant over where the actual plant would be once we place it. So now if we place it, then the plant goes to over there. Awesome. But it seems like our shadow is still there, so we have to hide it once we place the plant. So instead of this if, let's make it into an if else. And inside of the else, let's just hide. Cool. Now let's try it out. And as you can see, it seems to work. Awesome. Now one thing though, is that I can place multiple plants in the same grid. And I don't want that. So to fix this, let's go inside our P shooter sprite and create a new list. And I'll call this placed plants positions. And click OK. So when the flag is clicked, let's delete all of placed plants positions. And whenever we place a plant, so over here, let's add our place X and place Y inside of this list. So I'm going to go to operators and I'm going to drag two join operators just like that. And I'm going to put place X into here, place Y into here, and I'll join these two with a comma. So now, whenever we place a plant, then its position gets added inside of this list. So this is the X and this is the Y. So now we want to detect if our plant is not in the same position, then we can place it. So inside of the if mouse down, let's also drag an and let's check not. Let's go to variables, go inside of the list, and drag this. So not placed plants positions contains our join place X and join place Y block. All right, and we also want to add this to the plant shadow. So let's drag this and let's drag this on the left and drag this entire thing inside of here. Cool. Now if we try it out, then we are unable to place the plant on the same place. Now the last thing is that I'm going to add a really simple zombie spawning system. So I'm going to go to the zombie sprite, create a new list. I'll just call this zombie spawn Y positions, and then click OK. And under the when flag clicked, let's delete all of zombie spawn Y positions, and let's just add the Y position of where each zombie would spawn. So I want the first row to be somewhere over here. All right, so I'm going to add, let's say 120 on the top row, and then 65 on the second one, and then 3 on the third one, oops, and then -49 on the fourth one, and lastly -118 on the last row. Now I'm going to remove this forever loop and put it under a when I start as a clone, and I'm going to drag a new forever loop and do forever create clone of myself, and let's just do wait, let's say 5 seconds. And I'm going to drag a show under the clones and hide the original sprite. Now lastly, inside of this forever loop, we are going to make the zombies go to a random one of these 5 Y positions. So to do that, we can go to variables and drag an item of block, put it inside of the Y, and go to operators, drag a pick random 2, put it inside of here, and do pick random 1 to 5 of zombie spawn Y positions. And one important thing is that this should be zombie spawn Y positions, not placed plants positions. All right, let's try it out again. And now the zombie should spawn on a random row. Awesome. Now one thing though is that when a zombie is hit, all of them flash, just like that. And we don't want that to happen. So let's go back. And inside of this flash animation, let's also check if touching pea shooter. All right, now let's try it out again. And only the zombie which is touching the pea should flash. Awesome. And as you can see, we now have multiple zombies on different rows, and we can place multiple pea shooters. Cool. Now I'm also going to set this thing to the back. So I'm going to go to the plant selection sprite and go to looks and make it go to back layer. All right, now the pea shooters should be on top, just like that. Awesome. As you can see, we have multiple zombies in different lanes, and we can place multiple pea shooters, and the pea shooters follow a grid system, just like that. And we cannot stack pea shooters. Cool. But anyways, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe too if you haven't already. In the next video, I'll be improving the bullet and zombie collisions and also add sun. And of course, feel free to let me know in the comments below what you want me to add next. But anyways, that's it. See ya.